And thriving. Okay. Oh, hello everyone. This is Erica Hines. It's good to be talking to you all again. Um, America, founder, CEO of Black Women Thriving, um, a platform that has been built to help uh, Black women and everyone at work thrive in their workplaces. And this is our monthly LinkedIn Live that we do. I did take off, it's September, right? I did take off August because nobody's really working during August. And for those of you who were, you needed a break. So we're back. We're back with our monthly LinkedIn Live webinars. And we're going to close out the year strong. Today's focus is really going to be thinking about kind of where we all are at the end of the year in terms of being at work and some of what we're facing. And I want to talk about a topic that has gotten a lot of airplay, but I want to talk about how it's always been a bit dicey for Black women to truly live into this one particular area. And so today's topic, we're going to talk about authenticity, but I kind of want to set the scene. So, like I said, we're in August. And as we know, typically inside of organizations, this is a time when, we're in September, right? So we're in September where I've often said that if we're in September, you're essentially in December because it's like we are all just in this fast push towards the holidays and the end of the year, right? Meeting your end of the year goals. Maybe it's performance season. Maybe it's strategic, planning season. Maybe it's whatever, promotion season. There's just a lot that has to get accomplished, and that people are feeling the pressure of that. And in that context, um, especially this year and for the last few years, in the movement to like push people towards the end of the year, um, people's experience at work has sort of gone on a downward spiral. So at the same time that we're doing this big push, what people have also been experiencing is like decreased engagement at work, right? Burnout is at an all-time high, and trust has been slipping. Lots of studies have talked about how trust has sort of been on a downward spiral, including our own research that we put out. Talked about how trust has been slipping for a long time. And these two sort of like situations at the same time of pushing towards the end of the year, but also just kind of working in a workplace that doesn't feel that great. That's the water that most of us are swimming in right now. Okay. But I want to talk about that in the context of Black women. And I want to talk about that in the context of Black women and how, as we all are swimming in this space of pushing towards the end of the year, but also not having a great place to work in, this idea of how can we show up fully as ourselves, even that request can feel disingenuous and feel like it's draining. And in thinking about that, this idea of like all of these things being true, this idea that how do I show up fully as myself in a workplace that by and large has never felt safe for me. And even more so now, which we're going to get into in just a little bit, feels less unsafe for me. How am I supposed to actually show up fully, do that hard work of pushing towards the end of the year when in fact I do feel sort of crummy about the place that I'm working in and feel crummy when I'm working in it. And I'm not saying this is true for everyone, but I do want to acknowledge those feelings and those feelings in the room. So The connection that I wanna take time and spend time today, like, making for us and talking through is really this idea is that w if we have continued to be asked, like, "How can you bring yourself fully to work? How can you make sure that, like, you're showing up, and being authentic?" Um, that doesn't feel safe. It doesn't feel safe for folks. Um, and that lack of safety doesn't just impact me, and I'm gonna speak as, a Black woman, as sort of like not gonna speak on behalf of all Black women, but I am going to speak on behalf of this Black woman. Like, if that doesn't feel safe, and if it doesn't feel like a space where I feel as though I can do that, um, that erodes my ability to show up as a productive member of your team and your organization. And if one individual feels that way, um, imagine what that looks like with the multiplier effect. Imagine what that looks like when a whole bunch of people feel like they can't show up authentically and they can't show up as themselves. Because, as I just said, right now in 2025 on Beyonce's internet, a whole bunch of people feel like they can't show up fully as themselves. A bunch of people feel as though they have to show up with this amount of safety and conformity around them um, because of everything that's happened in the workplace over the past year. Um, but I want to specifically talk about one. I want to specifically talk about one big thing that has happened that if we look at it in sort of like an anthropology way, the cracks were there. The cracks were there. And those cracks, which which should have been repaired a long time ago, they managed to show up in a really visible way. And so this example that I'm going to look at is one that I've been talking about on LinkedIn and been writing about over on the blog for a long time. Not a long time, but I've written one article and we're about to put out another article about, which is the forced exit of, I mean, the numbers keep going up, but I'm going to stick with the number of 320,000 Black women who have, in the last 8 months, been uh, who have exited the workplace. And that number, we've said it, we've said it, we've said it. Like that number, 300,000 Black women exiting the US workplace. That is a ginormous number of people to no longer be in the workforce. And to think about that, that is one group of people who are now no longer in the workforce or looking for jobs like that. Like I I think it's so large that we haven't wrapped our heads around it. That number is staggering. Um, and not only is it staggering, but it's shocking. But what I want to point out is that the the conditions which led to 300,000 Black women, in some cases being forced to resign, in some cases being released from their position, in some cases being fired, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Those are a direct downstream and the results of working in workplaces that were precarious for Black women in the first place, where Black women were where the workplace, the conditions that were there, um, were such that it didn't support Black women necessarily to have their best performance, to be placed in line for promotion, or to feel as though they could, or that they were seen in sort of like the best light. And here's what I mean by that. So, um, I don't want to sort of go into a whole bunch of statistics, but I do want to just kind of highlight that particular make that point a little clearer for folks, which is to say that when I say that for Black women, the 300,000 exits, um, the fissures, the lines that were there for Black women to suddenly be the people that they were like, "You know what? First to go." That came from working in workplaces that still had bias in their promotion systems, still had bias in their, hiring, still had situations where Black women felt as though they had to show up, um, and, you know, uh, um, code switch in order to play the game of being in the workplace. And those examples that I give you uh, all fly in the face of saying to someone that you have to show up authentically. So, thinking about that, when we think about what happened, um, we can, I think we have to acknowledge these cracks that sort of made it so that this situation um, could happen. Okay. And I think that understanding that those cracks continue to exist for those Black women who are still there, and frankly for their non-Black colleagues, right? The fact that workplaces still are places where these conditions of biases still exist. I mean, I think it leads to the fact that people are feeling less and less trust in their workplaces being fair places that they can work in. And I think I've said work 3 different times, but I hope you get my drift. So, um, let's look at what's the cost of this, um, and how organizations can actually address this. Well, so first I want to talk about the cost. I want to talk about the cost of people feeling as though they can't show up and be authentic. And I've given you some examples of that before, particularly as it pertains to Black women. So, for example, you know, code switching, at work, feeling as though you have to sort of suppress the way that you might naturally talk or dress. And I think for Black women, also sort of like making your personality smaller, or not being as outspoken. These are all ways that um, I have felt like I have had to show up that isn't actually inside of my authentic self. Just as like a tangent, it's very interesting sometimes to me, not to other people. I'll say like, people think that I'm really sort of have a very light spirit until I get very serious. And the fact of the matter is, like that sort of seriousness of who I am is always there. Um, and so I have sometimes found in work situations, when I get to a point that I feel very like aggravated by a situation, I become what I call Erica Esquire, because I did go to law school, and so that portion of me, that aspect of my personality, is one that becomes very direct, very like, um, here's what we're going to do, like lays out the plan, and then is basically sort of like says to everyone, like, get on board. And I have often, just again, to give you that example, that is a part of authentically of who I am. But for a very long time, I sort of felt like, oh God, if I switched into that, I felt like I was too much, that I suddenly became scary. And it's taken me actually probably in the last 5 years to not see it as like a part of switching, for myself, but actually to realize that it's like something that I can tap into that serves me and serves situations well. But it does go to this idea of showing up authentically. I think for a long time as a professional, I sort of felt like, well, if I could be like sort of like light and funny and not have this side that it becomes very direct and very like, 1, 2, 3, this is what we're going to do, that that was a way for me to make people feel comfortable. And while I still think that it's important for people to feel comfortable, I think in terms of thinking of my own authenticity, I have to actually accept that both parts are true. And so I offer you that as like, this is one Black woman saying how in her own professional career, she has felt that, uh, that, uh, felt the need to be less than, and how have had to sort of like write that for myself, but also to realize that people's reactions to me, that it was not my job to calibrate for them in real time. Okay. Now I know that I actually, as the owner of my own business, sit in a very sort of like specific space where I can say, well, if you don't like it, that's fine. But I offer you that to say, like, if that's my experience, I'm pretty sure that there are other Black women that might could probably share similar experiences with you, um, like the one that I just shared. So, what's the answer to this? What's the answer to this authenticity bias that we have? What's the answer to people feeling as though they cannot show up as themselves? Um, in the past, we've always made like people not showing up as themselves, people not feeling as though they could like, sort of have the full spectrum of their personality as an individual problem. We were like, oh, well, if you do this, whatever, you can, I don't know, show up just as I said. It's like, being funny and lighthearted to also being very serious. Like, this is, you need to feel more comfortable. But increasingly, the thing is that in order for people to feel as though they can even a little bit show up more fully as themselves, it's actually the responsibility of organizations to create, you know, this is sort of like the underlying bedrock framework of everything I say every month, which is that organizations have the responsibility to create the conditions in which people feel as though they can show up authentically. And I want to, I can say that in this very uh, academic way, but I want to take it back to the situation that we find ourselves in right now. And I want to think about, and I've thought a lot about the people who are left after 300,000 Black women have you know are gone from these workplaces for a period of time or in looking for jobs, and like who's left and whether or not they feel like they can show up authentically and whether it's safe and whether, just what is it like in the workplace right now. And so I think that right now, for leaders and for organizations who do care about the folks that are still there, I think they do have this opportunity and this responsibility to dig into how can we make sure not just that people feel safe to show up at work and even like contribute, but how can we like sort of like reground ourselves and set up the space where people feel as though they can bring their full selves to work. And that, in this instance, might be, yes, I'm struggling. Yes, this is hard. Yes, this is good. You know, um, yes, this seems scary. All of this, like, how do we set up the workplaces where people can, share the good, bad, and the ugly and feel as though they can not just share that, but put it out on the table and also have it be received and also continue to do their work. How can people truly show up and be authentic? And I want to say that it starts at the beginning. And I want to talk about, in the time that I have left, which is going to be like another 5 minutes, I want to talk about a tool that we developed over a year ago for organizations called investigating biases around bringing your authentic self to work. And the reason that we didn't know that this was going to happen this year, but the reason that we created this tool is because of this pervasiveness of the idea that, like, as a Black woman, could I really bring my authentic self to work? And how could an organization signal to me throughout my time there that I could do that? And so I just want to give you a little insight into what that tool has and why I think that it could be helpful to you and your organization. So this is not a training. This is not a training for that. But what this tool is that it sets up a framework and a guide to help leaders do three things in terms of investigating how, this bringing your authentic selves to work. It says it helps you name the bias. So where is authenticity being demanded but not supported, right? Where is it being demanded but not supported? It helps you spot the system that bias exists in. So, for example, what are the everyday practices that are reinforcing this sort of bias? And we give examples of, like, onboarding. We give examples of um, performance reviews. We talk about, well, where does this bias show up that is demanded, but there's no support structure for people to show up authentically. And then the third thing that this tool does is it suggests that you shift the practice. So how in these same systems, onboarding, performance reviews, etc., how can we shift our practices in those systems so that we're disrupting ourselves around saying to people that we want them to show up authentically, but not creating the space where we can support them. Okay. Um, and so this tool, I wrote it, so I think it's super practical and very good. Shows you how to do that. For example, we talk about with onboarding that we say to folks, make sure that there's clarity on day one about expectations of people, how people are expected to talk to each other. Make sure that there's, like, opportunities for people to be mentored and sponsored, etc. A lot of the advice that we put in there, I would say, isn't brand new, but it is brand new in the instances that we're talking about. And that's okay, because sometimes what we really want for leaders, or what I really want for leaders, is I want to say, like, listen, I think that you have the skills to actually navigate, manage, and lead in these circumstances. But I think you just need to think about using them in a new context. So that's what things like this tool does. This tool can be found if you become a member of our Thrive Hive. Um, so I want to close this out by talking about ways that we might be able to seal the cracks that I started to talk about 20 minutes ago. When organizations apply intention to the systems that they already have where there's cracks in place, things like authenticity, things like safety stop being so risky. And so, our work is on behalf of Black women, where we center Black women, but we center Black women because we believe that when Black women thrive, everyone thrives. So for us, we want to see Black women have a higher sense of engagement, a higher sense of motivation, and a higher sense of belonging. We would like to see that trajectory go higher. And we know that the ripple effect of that will be not just good for them, but good for their peers and good for their workplaces. So I want to leave you with this. If you're a leader, ask yourself, is now a time when we can reinforce our commitment to helping people show up authentically? And do we have the support systems in place to let them do that so that they can do their best work? And if you're employees, I want you to think about that in terms of your workplace and what it is that you feel, what are the supports that you would need to either, ideally, yes, show up authentically at work, But if you aren't able to do that, I want you to think about the supports that you need to deal with the impacts of that. Because the thing is that this isn't gonna go away. We are here on Thrive Hive to help you and give you inspiration. We're here to give you practical, doable steps to create a thriving culture. I hope that the time that I spent today, which I know is a lot, but I had a lot to say, and frankly, I didn't talk in August. Um, but I hope that this was helpful to you, and I'll see you next month. But more importantly, I hope that I'll see some of you inside of Thrive Hive. Thanks.